Good. All right. Welcome to the Clear Creek Forum. My name is Ryan Layton. I'm the director of our spiritual formation and also campus pastor for this campus, the Egret Bay campus. And so we do these forums. We've done two of them already. This is our third forum. And the idea is for us to do these once or twice a year to be able to dig deeper into certain topics. They have been over sermon series that we've been doing, but they're not always going to be that way. Sometimes we've brought in somebody, sometimes we've done somebody in-house, like tonight is one of those. So really the format for tonight is this. We're going to hear from our speaker for a while. I don't know how long he's going to go. He doesn't know how long he's going to go. If at all during that time, if you need to go to the restroom, just feel free to get up and go. He's not going to stop and wait for you. But there is going to be a point where he will have to take a break, and we will go outside, and we have some cookies out there for a short intermission, and then we'll come back for some Q&A. So what that means is we need questions from you. So at any point tonight, as you're hearing him talk up front, you can send us in your questions. If you go to slido.com and put in the keyword end times, or if you just snap that QR code, it takes you right there and you can put in your questions. Now, if you're listening and you're thinking, I don't have any questions, still, I want you to go there because you can read the other questions that other people are posting and you can upvote them so that way we'll be able to actually see that question come up to the top and more likely to try to entertain those questions. Now, we're not going to be able to get to every single question. We'll try to do as many as we can, but I know at the end we're going to have a list of questions that we cannot address in this setting, and so we're going to find some other ways to do that, maybe a Clear Creek Resources podcast or articles, different content following this event. So make sure you put your questions on there. We'll do our best to get those answered. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker for tonight. You know him as Yancey Arrington, our teaching pastor at Clear Creek Community Church. If you're not from Clear Creek, welcome, glad that you are here. But let's welcome Yancey Arrington.
Thanks, buddy. I'm glad you guys are here for our in-depth study of Lamentations. So if you have your Bibles. All right. Here's the deal. So I'm glad that you're here. I hope you guys have been enjoying our Revelation series. It's been something that's been fun for us. And I really thought it would be apropos for us to do a forum just because I wanted to see how many more people I could get mad through the study of Revelation. Nancy, this is not how I grew up listening and learning all this stuff. And we know that. That's why we're teaching it, to be honest with you. And so when it comes to studying the end times, and we look at things like the book of Revelation, it seems like there are 1,000 different interpretations, and you get all kinds of weird stuff. And as I told you at the start of this series, how I grew up within one of these certain views that we're going to look at. And I was taught like locusts in the Bible mean military helicopters, and ICBMs mean this, and this is Russia, and that's Gorbachev, and that's the Shah of Iran, and that's all the stuff I grew up with. So I always thought like there was going to be Armageddon around the corner. And then I realized as I grew in God's word and learned about some things that there were some different views than just the one that I was taught. Now, again, here's what I want to do. And maybe because of that, I love this quote by G.K. Chesterton, who said this. He said, though St. John the Evangelist saw many strange monsters in his vision in Revelation, he saw no creature so wild as one of his own commentators. That's true. I think that's super true. Like the craziest stuff that I hear comes out of the book of Revelation, not because it's in the book of Revelation, it's because some guy who was a prophecy expert told you this is what's supposed to be, but we don't have enough knowledge to speak back to that person to go, you know what, maybe that's not true. But what I want to do is kind of fill you guys in on some different views about stuff that you may have thought there was only one view, that the church was unanimous on, and it's not at all. So, before we go any further, let me give you a little preface here. One, this will be my best shot to help you guys understand what I understand, what we understand as a teaching team. And I'm not going to put all those guys on the line. I'll just do I've been doing some of the heavy lifting on this as far as I got into this study about a year ago, just for me personally. I wanted to hit up over the top scholars on Revelation. I spent 3 months, sometimes 8 to 10 hours a day, just reading through Revelation for me, line by line, precept by precept. And I was just blown away by what I saw in it. But I want to tell you this, there are a lot of things that we're not going to cover in our series that I want to cover tonight. By a lot of things, I mean two, but they're two big ones. two really big ones. So I'm going to do the best I can do to tell you what I think is the right way to look at this. And by the right way, I mean, here are the different ways you can look at it, and you can make your own decision. And if I've misrepresented someone's view, you'll just have to forgive me. I've tried to do my due diligence. I've asked people who hold these views, like, hey, is this right? They're like, yeah, that's right. Don't screw it up. I know I've heard this whole thing. So just know that. Secondly, I'm not gonna answer questions tonight that we have already addressed in our series. So if you're like, Yancey, what's 666 mean? You should have showed up 2 weeks ago. Yancey, what's the mark of the beast? I wish you'd have shown up that same time as well. Because we've got that. It's on Clear Creek Resources. You can watch it. You can go see how we go in depth on that, what all that means. But I don't want to waste your time. So I said, they've asked me, how long is this going to take? I've never done this before, this forum. And so some of this stuff is what I do with my systematic theology. So my systematic guys and gals that are here, they're going to get like a refresh later on. Here are the two questions I want to address. I want to talk about what about the millennium and what about the rapture, right? So we don't fill up a room like this because we want to talk about Lamentations. We fill up a room because you've heard something about the rapture. You believe something about the rapture, but many of you don't even know why you believe what you believe about the rapture because you read it in a book, or you saw it in a movie, or someone had it on a cool little bumper sticker. This car will be unmanned when the rapture happens. And so you think that God's going to zip you up and zip you out, and you're going to leave everything but your underwear. Maybe that stays here too. That is a view. But did you know it's not the only view? We're going to get into all that. So here's what I want to do. You'll have to excuse me. My throat's a little parched because I already preached twice this morning, and so I'll be drinking a lot of water here. Let's talk about the millennium because we're not going to get to talk a lot about it in our series. Where's Bruce? Bruce, where are you? Where's Bruce? Did he leave? Oh, he's back in the back. Bruce, you're doing Revelation 20, is that right? Okay, so Bruce is going to tell you all you need to know about the millennium. But what he doesn't cover, I need to cover tonight. Because there's a lot of stuff in Revelation 20 that he's got to get to that's actually beyond the millennium. Now, what's the millennium about? Well, here we go. Let me start off with what I would say as we talk about it. Now, if you don't have notes, if you're not taking notes, that's great. I'm sure all this is going to absorb in your brain, but have fun. I'm going to start off with the quotation from a guy I really respect named Grant Goldsworthy. He's written a lot of books. He's a professor of Old Testament biblical theology and hermeneutics at Moore College in Sydney, Australia. He's a globally respected theologian. And when it comes to entering dialogue about the millennium, here's what he has to say. He says, the millennium is not the central theme of Revelation. Can I repeat that? The millennium is not the central theme of Revelation. The explicit references to Christ's reign of 1,000 years are confined to one passage in the whole of the Bible, Revelation 20. 1 through 10. Now, if you didn't see the challenge there, let me highlight it for you. There's only one passage in the entire Bible that mentions the 1,000 years. Now, here's what you need to know. They taught us this even when I was like a little kid in student ministry. You never build an entire doctrine off of one verse in the Bible. You never build an entire system of belief off of one section in all the scriptures. Period. If you can help it, you don't want to do that. So what do? You have to look at the rest of the other scriptures that speak about what you believe about the millennium and hope that you can put those pieces together. Sometimes you can't. But if you have one passage saying this and another passage saying that and they seem to conflict, but then you have 4 passages saying this and one passage saying the opposite, you usually go with the 4 passages to interpret the one instead of the one to interpret the rest of them. Y'all follow me? So that's part of the process here. It's not to say that the millennium is unimportant. It is. It's just not the essence of Revelation. In fact, I just said Bruce is doing this sermon on Revelation 20. You'll never hear about the millennium again. You haven't heard about it yet. He'll do that message. You won't hear about it again for the rest because the Bible speaks nothing about it. Even in Revelation, it's just this passage. And yet this passage has been a conundrum for Christians for literally millennia. So let's look at the passage. If you have a Bible, you might want to look at this yourself, make your own notations, do whatever you want to do. Write it in ink on your forearm, however you want it. Revelation 20, we'll look at the first 3 verses. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and he threw him into the pit, and he shut it, and he sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. And after that, he must be released for a little while. Now, here's what Alan Bandy, professor of New Testament, who's at Greek at OBU. Any Oklahoma people out here? I know I got 2 of them. We got an elder out there. So this guy's at Oklahoma Baptist. I think he gets to the heart of the debate when he says this: the critical question is whether this age, what we're living in right now, will issue immediately into the final eternal state, that's called the golden age, or whether a further intermediary stage of the eschatological kingdom, a silver age, lies between. And you're like, Yancey, I have no idea what that guy just said there. Let me explain it to you. When you talk about the millennium, you got to figure out what it is. And for some people, the millennium when they see the Bible, they see Jesus coming, and when he comes, he brings us into the golden age of the kingdom. The kingdom is consummated. It's already here, but not yet in its fullest. And yet some people believe, and many of them, I should say, believe that when Jesus comes back, the kingdom doesn't come in its fullness. It comes in somewhat a partial kingdom, at least a partial kingdom compared to the new heavens and the new earth. And it's known as the silver age for some. It's an intermediary age. And they don't call it that, but that's what it is. And so you're like, what does this have to do with anything? I'm going to show you later on what that means when it comes to the millennium. So there's like 4 big factors that you have to work through, or 3, I should say, that determine how you view the millennium, how you interpret Revelation 20. By the way, when Bruce preaches it, that's how you interpret Revelation 20. No pressure, no pressure. How do you view the relationship between Revelation 19 and 20? Is it recapitulating itself? Is 19 this, and does 20 recapitulate it from a heavenly perspective? A lot of people believe that. Some people believe no, 19's this, and then 20 comes right after that. They're sequential. Well, that'll affect how you read Revelation 20. Finally, how do you understand the relationship between Israel and the church? There are people that believe, and I'm not saying right or wrong, just hear me. There are people that believe that Israel and the church are completely separate. God's got 2 different plans. Israel's plan A, the church's plan B. And there are other people out there, Christians, that believe, no, that's not. God's only had one plan. He started with Israel, and he's moved now into the church, the true Israel. Okay, well, how you understand that determines how you're going to interpret the millennium. And so there's 4 major views, just to give you guys a heads up. So if you are taking notes, there are 4 major views that we have of the millennium today. We have pre-millennialism, dispensational premillennialism, amillennialism, and post-millennialism. So I'm going to break these things down, and I've worked on this on my little keynote presentation for this to kind of unroll as we go through, almost like a timeline. So if it messes up, it's all on me. I didn't have to anyone else do this. So this is just, I'm a teaching pastor, not a tech guy, but here's what we're going to do. So let's look at premillennialism. Here's what premillennialism believes. And you might also say this is called historic premillennialism. So the idea is this: we're in the church age. Jesus comes, he dies, he rises from the dead, he ascends, and that begins the church age. After the church age, you have the tribulation. Okay, so you have this period of time. Premillennialists, some of them believe it's just 7 years. Some of them believe it's an indeterminate amount of time. But they all believe that there is a tribulation that's not associated with the church age. It's separate from that, but the church is still in it. So notice, I'm trying to give you kind of the points of each one of these views so you'll know in your head what this is all about. So the church actually endures the tribulation, and then after the tribulation, Jesus returns. Now I want you to notice something here. When a premillennialist uses the term rapture, what they're saying is they're being caught up with Jesus. I think this will work. There we go. Now, if you're watching this on live stream or on video, you're not seeing anything I'm doing. You just paid the price for not being here. All right, so on the screen that I'm pointing to with my laser pointer, you would see it right here. But right there, y'all, that is what's known as the rapture for a lot of people. So what they believe is the rapture, how premillennialists would understand it is this: we get caught up with Jesus right here. We don't go anywhere north. We come right back to the earth, and then that's when Jesus starts his millennial kingdom. The millennium, 1,000-year reign. Most premillennialists that I know take that as a literal 1,000 years. Although some might argue it could be an indeterminate period of time. Nevertheless, this is a time where Jesus is on the earth, reigning with his church over people that are believers and unbelievers. By the way, happen to be here at the time. There's a little tension here, so let's work through this. In the tribulation, you have the resurrection of believers when they come, when Jesus comes back, and Satan is bound for that 1,000 years. And he's completely bound, like he's not even there. And he doesn't show up until the end. Here's what happens. Now notice I have the church here on each one of these phases up here on the big screen. The church is present obviously in the church age, it's present in the millennium, and it's present in the tribulation and the millennium. That's what a premillennialist believes. By the way, premillennial means they believe Jesus is coming, before the millennium. Before millennium. That's what that simply means. So, let me give you some else. At the end of the millennium, Satan is released. Armageddon happens. And then you have the general resurrection of the unbelievers. So what you have going on here, actually, not only unbelievers, you'd also have the general resurrection of believers, because believers can die here unless you have a glorified body. And I know it seems complicated. Just hold on. If you're a premillennialist, you believe you've been resurrected and you have a glorified body and you're living with Jesus on the earth for 1,000 years. A tension is, at the end of this, there's gonna be a war. Now someone's gonna go, well, I thought there were only Christians here. Well, depends on who you ask, but at the end of the tribulation, there's supposed to be Jesus coming in a great war, right? And this war in Revelation 19, it says that Jesus extinguishes all the evil. He kills all the unbelievers in judgment. And they'll be like, well, then who's here? What they'll say is people that became Christians during the tribulation and that are still alive, so they don't have regenerated bodies. They're not glorified. I know this is complicated, just follow me. So they're still alive going into the millennium. What if you died, you're resurrected, and you have a glorified body? So what they have in the tribulation, in the millennium, is you have glorified Christians and you have non-glorified Christians living together. The non-glorified Christians can have kids, glorified Christians can't. So they have children who go for 1,000 years, and those children somehow become unbelievers, and they wage a war against God at the end. That's where Armageddon comes from. Now, when I describe these things, I'm not saying you have to believe this or not. I'm trying to be fair to describe these different positions. Y'all follow me? Okay, so after judgment, they have the new heavens and the new earth. This goes into the world without end. Revelation 21, by the way, so that's what we're talking about. And then if not, it's eternal judgment, hell, right? The lake of fire, the beast, the dragon, and his followers are thrown in there. So that's premillennialism. All right, test is in 5 minutes. Get your notebooks out. So what you need to understand is this is, again, we have glorified believers and unbelievers in the millennium, along with also people that have become Christians. This view is very historic. It's why it's called historic premillennialism. It's been around from the first couple of centuries. I think it was popularized in the 2nd century AD. It's got a lot of legs to it. It's been around a long time. I'm not going to critique it. I'm just going to explain it. That's premillennialism. The next one I want to talk about is dispensational premillennialism. Now, someone just went, what are you talking about, dispensational premillennialism? So, is that different than premillennialism? It is, and I'll tell you why. Dispensationalism, shorthand, if I can do this as briefly as possible, is at least a view that says that the church and Israel are completely separate. Now, people will argue because dispensationalism is broad. There's old dispensationalists, there's progressive dispensationalists, there's I don't know what a dispensationalist is group, there's all kinds of dispensationalists, right? But what they believe in general is that God has two different plans. And if God made plans to Israel, he needs to fulfill those plans with Israel, not with the church. They're two separate. And this is, you're gonna see where they depart from regular premillennialism. I would argue this is the main view of Christians today in North America, not globally though. This is the main view of Christians in North America if you're an evangelical. I think 65% of evangelicals say that they are dispensationalists. You may go, I never even heard the term, but I would dare say that how I describe this may be how you understand the end times. So let me go with it. It also has a church age, right? Now here's what's different. Because God has a different plan for Israel and the church, he's got to get the church off the planet. Y'all starting to know where I'm going with this one? There's this kind of return of Jesus. What I mean by kind of is that this is what they call up here on the screen, y'all. This is the rapture part. Now, when they say rapture, a dispensationalist says rapture, this is God took you from your clothes are gone, the car crashes. This is the Left Behind stuff, Tim LaHaye, all those kind of guys. I'm not trying to say right or wrong. I'm telling you that's their position. The whole this car will be unmanned, that's this view. So the idea is that Jesus returns, immediately there's judgment. Actually, they have about 8 different judgments. They have a judgment at the cross. There's a judgment here because in order to be taken up to heaven, you have to have been judged. So they believe there's a judgment of believers here, but there's a resurrection of believers. You're resurrected, you're glorified, and then you get taken to heaven. So that's why the church is going up here. That's their view. Now, this is the Antichrist pops up then. It's a party. And all of a sudden, we've got tribulation. Now, the reason I had to make this a small t, because they got a lot more moving parts than all these other views. So just go with me here. Where is the church on earth during the tribulation in this view? Doesn't look like it. Now, it just depends on which dispensationalist you talk to. Some say, how can I do this? If you don't believe that you're going through the tribulation, you're called a pre-tribulationist. Huh? Makes sense? If you think you're going to go 3.5 years, you're called a what? Some of you are mids. You just got it. You can't say I'm a mid-trib. So they're called mid-tribulationist. If you go through the whole thing, what do you call that person? A Christian. So let's move on. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. It was too easy to give that one up. They're called post-trib. So you have pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, and they all lovingly, maybe not so lovingly, fight about that, depending on how they interpret tribulation. But here's their big deal, and you'll hear dispensationalist preachers say this all the time: church, don't worry about the tribulation, you'll never be there. You'll never be there. This is not for you. You'll never be there. Everything's literal and everything's linear. So this is literally 7 years, right on the dot. And then what happens is this. You have the return of Jesus. This is where it gets a little different. You have the return of Jesus. At the return of Jesus, there's another judgment. Another judgment. I believe they take that from Revelation 19. This judgment happens again. All unbelievers are destroyed, except those who hide in the hills. They would say that, no, literally, that Jesus doesn't see them or something, and they get away. I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm trying to tell you how they would explain it. Satan's bound here, much like that we see in historic premillennialism, and here's the difference. In the millennium, I'm going to show you something here. What's the millennium like? It's a 1,000-year reign of Jesus, but it's an explicitly Jewish kingdom. Why? Where's the church? Church is in heaven. So here's what I've tried to share with you guys as we see where the church is. The church is on earth during the church age. Jesus raptures secretly, and that's why this is outlined where it's kind of like you can't really, it's a secret rapture. No one knows it's coming. No one sees anything. This is, it's just a mystery. Everyone's gone. These guys zip up here. Sorry, I'm not trying to be trite about it. They go to heaven. They're up there with Jesus. There is some debate about how much amongst dispensationalists, how much is the church involved in the millennium? I think you have guys like John Walvoord, some of the old school dispensationalists. They're like, listen, the church is for heaven and Israel's for the earth. That's what they would say. The kingdom of God for the church is only up here in heaven, and the kingdom of the earth is only for Israel here. But there are other guys in that same group said no, because the Bible says that the church will judge Israel, or something to that effect. So they'll say during the millennium, the church kind of is there. One guy, I don't know if it's Charles Ryer, I don't know who the guy is, one of the guys, one of the major writers says, actually, maybe it's Dwight Pentecost, the church will actually hover above the earth in the heavenly city of Jerusalem. Like you'll see it in the sky, but they won't come down, they'll only come down to judge. Because what you have to understand, for dispensationalism, they don't want to mix the church and they don't want to mix Israel. And so if I'm being fair, and I think I am, what they would say is this is explicitly Jewish because God, whatever promise God made in the Old Testament to Israel, those promises of which he's not fulfilled yet, he fulfills them here to Israel. So they'll get their patch of land back. I mean, even more than what they have. Many dispensationalists believe that they'll rebuild the temple. They'll reinstitute sacrifice. Some believe that. More progressives don't believe that because you can see how problematic that would be if you reinstitute sacrifice. But they are like, no, this is all about the Jewish millennial kingdom. And so I'll explain dispensationalism a little bit more. But so what you have to understand is like, you're really not a part of this, only if anything to judge, but it's really just for the Jews. Okay, where do we go from here? Well, this seems pretty similar to the other ones. At the end of the millennial kingdom, Satan is unloosed. He's loose, not unloosed, he's loosed. And then you have Armageddon. You've got another resurrection here. So just imagine if you're an unbeliever, you're not resurrected here or here, you're resurrected 1,000 years later. And then you have judgment. Then after that, this all looks the same. The dispensational premillennialists also have a new heavens and a new earth and the eternal judgment. Now the church comes back for sure here and it's Christian, whether they be Jewish Christian or Gentile Christian, all one family in Christ. We inherit the new heavens and the new earth. That's not what happens here, though, okay? All right. I can't wait to give you a test on this. So again, any promise that was made in the Old Testament that was not yet fulfilled, at least how they define not being fulfilled, gets fulfilled here for Israel. So what you have to maybe understand for a dispensational perspective is, again, this is God's plan A, and we're plan B. Now, they may not like that language. That's language I heard from dispensationalists when I was taught under dispensational teaching. And so they may not like that. That's actually what I heard when I was kind of growing up in some of this stuff. So again, not right or wrong, just trying to explain to you how they view that. So passages like Isaiah 65, Ezekiel 40 through 48, where it talks about the lion or the wolf lays down with the lamb, they say that that's all here. So that being said, that's dispensational premillennialism. We're going to come back to dispensationalism because, as you might see, they have a very unique view of the rapture that you're going to find out no other millennial view has. And yet it's the view that everyone believes. So I want to push back on you a little bit here. Watch this. Amillennialism. What's amillennialism? Amillennialism is it's rather popular. Denominations like Presbyterians or Anglicans and Eastern Orthodox and Lutherans. This is kind of, if you grew up in those traditions. I didn't. I had a little Anglicanism, but for the most part, I didn't know anything about this. If you come from those traditions, this is probably what you were taught. You believe this, or this is what an amillennialist believes. It's really a bad term. What does mean? If you're amoral. Yeah, you don't have any morals. You're kind of, they say amoral. You're not plus or minus. It's a bad term because it says that if you're an amillennialist, that means you don't believe in the millennium, but it actually means that you do believe in the millennium. It's just an inaugurated millennium. In other words, that's already going on. So what you see here, let me put these three things together. For amillennialists, here's the church age. Jesus dies, resurrected, now he reigns, and he reigns. And millennium is not a literal 1,000 years. It's an epoch of time. You have 10 is the number of completion as well. 10 3 times, you trinity it. It's this time that God has where he wants to do whatever he wants to do. It doesn't have an ending that we know about, only he does. And so for them, millennium's symbolic about Christ's current reign in the heavens. I'm just telling you what amillennialists believe. They also believe that we're always in the tribulation. We've always been in the tribulation. They also believe that at the end, I know you can't see it. Yeah, you can't see it on the big screen in here. And notice how it starts off light here and dark here. They believe that tribulation gets worse, that the further you go to the closer to Jesus' return, the more intense tribulation becomes, where it becomes the great tribulation. Y'all follow? So amillennialists interpret the millennium as describing really the present reign of deceased souls in heaven. They live with Jesus, reigning with him. That's how they interpret that. Now, what happens here? Here's what you're going to like about amillennialism is everything happens one time. It all happens one time. Jesus returns, Satan's released, the Antichrist is there, and Armageddon, and general resurrection, and judgment. And then you go to the new heavens and new earth. That's it. That's what amillennialists believe. They like to do their test as quick as possible, turn it in, and they're done. It's a very simplified way of understanding it. But to be fair, and I want to just, want to represent these guys well. With this going on, they see all of it concurrent. This is all, it's not two different, it's not the church in Israel, it's all the people of God. Jesus returns, everything happens. The very end here, Satan's release, Antichrist, Armageddon, all that happens. Jesus comes and judges and then ushers us in to the new heavens and new earth. Now, notice, no silver age. There's no intermediate step. It goes right into the golden age, as opposed to other ones. Just trying to tell you a little difference here. So, another important part of amillennialism is they believe in the already not yet. Now, we teach that here. We teach that a lot, already not yet. In other words, that the kingdom's already here, but not yet in the fullness of itself, not yet fully consummated, only because we believe Jesus teaches that. He says, the kingdom is here with you. I've brought the kingdom, but obviously not in its fullness till he returns. Anything else I need to mention there? Apparently, everyone's in really good shape, both in heaven and hell. So I don't know what to tell you. It's all I had. It's all I had. I'll say this. All the Old Testament prophecies about Israel are fulfilled in Jesus in this view. And Jesus fulfills that. It's not a literal land. that God's trying to put people back on. Jesus is the land, Jesus is the temple, Jesus is the lamb, Jesus is the priest. They would argue that all the promises in Jesus are yes. That's how they would defend that. And so everything is in Jesus. This also is, well, we'll get into how historical it is. This is also super historical. Actually, all of them are but one. And I'll show you that. All right, that's amillennialism. That's the easier one to figure it out. Post-millennialism. I don't know how to talk about post-millennialism. So what's post mean? After. So here's what they believe. Don't just reserve your feelings about this. So Jesus comes and he dies and he rises from the dead and he inaugurates the church age. They all believe the church age starts at the same time, all views. And they believe that the tribulation, also like all millennialists, starts at the same time, but they believe at some point it starts to die down. There's a great tribulation, we think, with post-millennialists, but at some point, the church becomes so successful in her mission, so wonderful in her mission, that that they enter into a millennial time. Now, millennium for the post-millennialist is also figurative, it's not literal. And they believe that Satan is bound during this time, bound in the sense that he is unable to deceive the nations from believing the gospel. By the way, amillennialists believe that too. Satan's bound during this whole time. In that, he can't deceive the nations from becoming followers of Jesus. That's why world missions works. They really believe world missions works, this view. Because they believe that the church is, I gotta stop because I'm gonna tell you the view I wanna believe, but I would really like this view. Because this view says the church is so successful that it basically has a period of peace and joy and beauty because the whole world has been moved by the mission of Jesus. And because of that, Jesus returns. The king, the palace, if you will, has been prepared for the king and he returns. And so it's almost like the golden age, they move into it by the power of the church, through the work of the Spirit. Christ returns, there's judgment, but the church is always there. Now this is very similar to amillennialism, but the big difference is this. Amillennials will be like, well, it's kind of good and kind of bad. Post-millennials are like, nope, it's kind of bad, but it starts off to get better and better and better and better. Now, post-millennialists kind of get hit up because we've had, this was really popular before World War I, not so popular after. Really popular before World War II, not so popular after World War II. Right now, post-millennialism is having a resurgence in Christianity, especially among evangelicals. I hope that doesn't mean World War III. Let's just hope that's not the case. Not trying to put anything on you. I'm not a prophet, so just go. It's all right. But this has a resurgence right now, and it trusts like the work of the two witnesses we saw in Revelation, that they've been given authority to share the gospel until the last person gets to be shared with. And so they just have confidence in that. And they have other passages. I don't want to go through the whole thing. But again, what you need to know about post-millennialism is that Jesus arrives after the millennium. And the millennium's a really, really good thing. Now, man, I can't believe I've gone through all this stuff because I didn't know how long this would take. This didn't really take me that long. So we're done. Let's pray. No. All right, what are we gonna do with this? So here's what I want to ask, you guys may wanna ask us. What position does Clear Creek hold on the millennium? Well, here's the drum roll, here's what we got. Here's what we believe, we're pan-millennial. However it pans out, that's what we believe. I'm just telling you, listen, however it pans out, that's what we believe. You can clap for that, because that's what we believe. Listen, I have my doubts about the way people define rapture, but if all of a sudden I'm in my underwear up in heaven, I'm like, Jesus, what happened? He's like, you should have believed the rapture I taught you, son. I'm like, well, I should have trusted my dad, but I didn't. I'm not really gonna argue. I mean, if I knew that there was one specific one that was the right one, I would wear that shirt. So we joke that we're pan-millennial. However it pans out, it's what we believe. Here's what we really say. We don't have an official millennial position. We don't have one. Now, do we lean certain ways as a teaching team? You better believe it. And if you've kind of read between the lines in our Revelation series, you kind of know where we stand, of how we interpreted it. Been a good series, hasn't it? I mean, listen, we're telling you straight up. Well, yeah, thank you. Sorry. Please clap more. I didn't mean it like that. Here's why we don't have an official position, though. Let's just say that Bruce and Yancey and Greg and Chris and Carl and Lance and Aaron and Ryan, I think I got them all. Let's say we all believed one view, and we very well might. we still wouldn't make that the official position at Clear Creek Community Church. And here's why. There have been way too many different views throughout the last 2,000 years for us to say this has got to be the one. When it's based on a book full of symbols and signs and images that the church has struggled to understand for so many years. It just seems unwise for us to say, here's our official position. Now, you might think, well, yeah, that's what most churches do. Nope. There are churches out there, many denominations, that make one view the official position, and they make it almost an essential belief. The pastor means like, that's wrong. You don't want to do that, because you might find yourself 10 years from now not believing the view that you used to hold, like me. I've shared with you 2 views on here that I used to hold. I don't hold them anymore, but you might, and heck, I might 10 years from now re-hold them again. But the reason that we don't hold this as an official position is because we feel like in good standing with the church historic, there's just been too many good Christians with too many good arguments for all these different sides. So if that bums you out, like, Nancy, I was hoping for Post. I was too, but I can't pull that one yet. Here's what, let me give you Justin Martyr, one of the first early church fathers. I mean, the guy lived around 100 AD. This guy knew people who knew Jesus. Here's what he says. I admitted to you formally that I and many others are of this opinion. He's a premillennialist, right? So he's like, I hold this view, and I believe that such will take place. So I want you to know, guys, you know what view I hold is what Martyr's saying. And you know I think that's how it's going to take place in history, as you assuredly are aware of. Like, I've talked to you about this. But on the other hand, I signified to you that many who belong to the pure and pious faith and are true Christians think what? Otherwise. Post-millennialist and amillennialist, and maybe even some dispensationalists in there as well. That there are different people. This is the second century early church father who said, here's the view I hold, but I can't be dogmatic about this view as a creedal position. By the way, do you know that none of these views ever made the creeds? None of them got creedal position. You know why? Because you couldn't be that dogmatic about it. Now, you can hold your view and do it with clenched fists. I'm just telling you, in the early church, these old boys and gals, they're like, listen, man, I hold on to what I believe tightly, but not so tightly that I can't dialogue with you and recognize that you're a follower of Jesus, and you might be a post-millennialist or an amillennialist or a dispensational premillennialist or some other thing I don't even know about. That's how they viewed that, and that's how we view that as well. So we're not going to, if the early church didn't find consensus on this, and it never made a church creed at Clear Creek, we're just going to see how it all pans out and go with what we know. And we have convictions about where we think this is, but if you're gonna ask us like, no, what does Clear Creek believe? On paper, here's what we believe. We believe that Jesus' return will be visible, corporal, glorious, and imminent. That's what we believe. That's what we believe. Well, I mean, that's what we believe. So, by the way, you can take any one of those other views and say the same thing. So you need to hear this from me. Jesus is coming and we will see him coming. It will be a bodily coming. It will be an amazingly glorious coming, and it's coming. It's imminent. It can come anytime. That's what we believe at Clear Creek Community Church. And so with that being said, I'm done forever talking about the millennium. No, I'm not. So those are the views of the millennium, and we're gonna get to some Q&A, but I wanna tell you that if you have a view of a millennium, that means you have a view of this next thing. You have a view of the rapture. You have a view of the rapture. Now, let me tell you this, boys and girls. What most North American evangelicals believe is incredibly uniform. And what I want to show you is not an attempt to convince you to believe something differently. I want to just tell you where your beliefs come from, because you might be surprised about where your beliefs come from. And for those who believe the rapture is the moment when Jesus, secretly snatches you away, which is the predominant view, the secret rapture theory is what it's called. If you believe that, God bless you. So I want you to hear that. No one ever teaches this stuff. This is what drives me nuts. And I wanted to use this forum to finally tell you guys where this stuff comes from. And you can still hold to whatever you want to hold. But let me give you a little history lesson here. All right. It all starts back, I feel like I'm an old time grandpa. It all starts back in the 19th century with a man named John Nelson Darby. John Nelson Darby was a Plymouth Brethren, got kicked out of his church because he had some really different views. By different, I mean weird views about the church. He got kind of booted out. And there's a rumor that a woman or a young girl told him that she had this vision about how history was broken up into these different periods that she called dispensations, they called dispensations. And Darby's known as the father of dispensationalism. It's a hermeneutical system. Wow, that's a big fancy word. It's a way people interpret the Bible that sought to divide biblical history into different eras or dispensations. That's not new, by the way. He wasn't the first guy to do that. People have divided the Bible into different eras, different dispensations, all throughout really the church age. The early church fathers do it. We do it when we talk about Old Covenant and New Covenant. That's it. We've talked about 2 eras or dispensations. But here's the difference with Darby. Darby believed that Israel had a different plan, and I told you this earlier, than the church did. And there was a strong difference between Israel and the church. And so what he promoted was this idea that Israel and the church had a parallel but separate roles. So they had 2 different tracks. Once Jesus came, Jesus comes to a dispensationalist. Darby would teach that Jesus came to the Jews. They rejected him and said, I'm done with you guys. I'm going to go to these guys, the Goyim, the Gentiles, and now we're doing a different plan. And so, like, why I mean different is they're separate plans. So, for example, a dispensationalist would read the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek. When you pray, do this. When you don't, they would say that's not for Christians. That's for Jews under the Old Testament law. In fact, all of the New Testament, for the most part, is not for Christians. By the way, I mean the Gospels, I should say, until Jesus dies. And from Acts on, that's pretty much for the Gentiles. Now you're like, I've never heard that. I know you've probably, maybe you have heard that. By the way, if you have a Ryrie study Bible, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, or a Schofield study Bible, that's what it says. You shouldn't, the Lord's Prayer doesn't apply. That's only for Jews. So I'm telling you, there's a big distinction between the church and Israel. And Darby also popularized the idea that because of that, the church would be raptured or snatched away just prior to what they call, well, it's not they, it's the Bible says, the 70th week of Daniel. That's their big deal. 70th week of Daniel. And the 70th week of Daniel, that's inaugurated when Jesus raptures the church, and this would be a secret coming. No one's gonna hear about it, you're not gonna see it, and this is the stuff that got popularized. But I wanna tell you how it got popularized, because this guy, as you can tell, 1882, 1800, we're talking 190 years, essentially, from what he started to write. So let me kind of give you a timeline on dispensational influence in the American church. It's uniquely American. It's uniquely American. John Nelson Darby influenced a guy named C.I. Schofield. Anyone ever heard of a Schofield Reference Bible? It's okay. I've got one. I mean, it's one of the Bibles I have. I used to use it for study when I was younger, right? He wrote the C.I. Schofield. I got married in Schofield's church in Dallas, Schofield Memorial Church. So, I mean, I got roots. I understand some of this stuff. Schofield wrote the Schofield Reference Bible, and it was super popular. It was super popular in America. Like, remember the NIV came out in the 1970s, and it was like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever? That's akin to what Schofield did back in the 1800s. And so he was influenced highly by the dispensational teaching of Darby, and so he wrote the Schofield Bible, and that's what it looks like, just like that. If it's not like this kind of color, you don't have a real one. I'm joking. That's what the Schofield reference is. So he wrote a Schofield Reference Bible, and everyone loved it. And it had a lot of notes in it. But one of the notes that he had in there was like, for example, Sermon on the Mount doesn't apply to you. Lord's Supper, the Lord's Prayer doesn't, because this is for Israel. So he was teaching dispensationalism in it, right? Because he believed it. That's fair. It's what he wanted to do. But what happened is that Schofield Reference Bible, Schofield influenced 2 other guys. They became somewhat, not his disciples, but kind of his fanboys, if you will. A guy named Dwight L. Moody. Anyone remember Dwight Moody? Dwight Moody was a famous evangelist. And then another guy named Lewis Sperry Schaefer. These guys loved the Schofield Reference Bible, were influenced highly by Schofield, and so they went on to found 2 prestigious learning institutions back in the day. D.L. Moody founded the Moody Bible Institute. Figures, it's because it's his name, Moody Bible. Good place. I have friends that went there. We have staff people that have been there, so we're not dogging Moody Bible. I just want you to understand. He founded that place, and it was a huge dispensational kind of center point for a lot of people. And then Lewis Sperry Schaefer founded Dallas Theological Seminary. We got guys on our staff that are DTS guys. I'm great. DTS is a great school. But what you need to understand is they're highly dispensational. Now, why would that be important? Because I want to show you the people they produced. They produced these people. Now I say these people, I don't mean these people, I just mean these people, okay? I need you to hear that. He called out Chuck Swindoll. No, I didn't. I just simply said Chuck Swindoll came out of this. He's the former president, chancellor of DTS. He's a DTS guy. Chuck Swindoll, John MacArthur, David Jeremiah, Charles Stanley. These guys, what they did initially is they were very popular on the radio. Anyone ever listen to them growing up? I did. I listened to those guys. I'm not dogging them. Dude, Chuck Swindoll can preach. John MacArthur can go verse by verse. Charles Stanley, didn't listen to him that much. So I'm just saying they were influential. In the 80s, they got generations of Christians to listen to them. Some of you are a part of the cassette ministries way back in the 80s. Come on now. Cassette ministry. Oh my gosh. I probably listened to 1,000 cassettes of John MacArthur from Grace to You. Okay? So here you have, I would argue, primarily people that wrote books. Now you have Billy Graham of all people. He's kind of the rock star of them all. Charles Ryrie, the Ryrie Study Bible. I have a Ryrie Study Bible. Tim LaHaye, he wrote, Left Behind. Hal Lindsey. My dad loved Hal Lindsey. He read Late Great Planet Earth. I read a couple of those books because Dad would feed to me like, this is the truth, son, you better read it. So I would read those books, right? And then on these last guys down here, you have Dave Breeze and Jack Vanapee. These are the guys that are on like religious TV. You see them on TV. Well, you don't see, I think Mr. Vanapee died a few years ago. Dave Breeze, I don't know if he's still alive, but these are the people that you see on TV. So notice you have radio, books, and television. They owned it. They owned it. In fact, you see a lot of these guys on today. They owned multimedia back. They were on to multimedia before the internet ever came around. And they influenced generations upon generations upon generations of people to believe dispensational theology. Now again, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just telling you, this is why 65% of evangelicals identify as dispensationalists. Because these men, primarily men, influenced a whole generation of American Christians. Now, what my only thing that I want to put before you is, if these people influenced you, you got to understand they're all in the same camp. All of them are in the same camp. All of them are in the same camp. So let me give you a perspective historically what this looks like in the history of the church, just to give you a little idea. Here's the history of the church from 100 to 2000. Let me show you how much Amillennialism and Pre-millennialism and Post-millennialism has been around. It's been around the entire time. You know how long Dispensationalism has been around? That long. I'm not saying right, I'm not saying wrong. I'm saying they're the new kids on the block because it started with Darby. They're only this old. They're not this old. Now, that may mean nothing to you, but I want you to understand, here, and I'll say this one more time. You can believe at Clear Creek, we're open-handed about this, any millennial view that you want. But the millennial view that you hold will determine what you believe about the rapture, okay? And if you believe in a secret coming, that's fine. You just need to know that's not even talked about for the major part of 2,000 years. For 1,800 years, no one knew anything about a secret rapture. No one knew anything of Jesus taking you up just in your skivvies and you never coming back to earth. Do you know this? No other view holds that. And there's a reason for that. And I'll show you the reason. There's two primary passages that come to mind when we talk about the rapture. Here's the first one, 1 Thessalonians 4:16 through 17. For the Lord himself, the reason I want to talk about this, y'all, we're doing a study in Revelation, not 1 Thessalonians, but 1 Thessalonians talks about the rapture. Have you noticed we haven't talked about the rapture in Revelation? Because it's not in it. Wow. It's not in there. I mean, really, there's nothing that says, and the rapture will happen. By the way, it doesn't even say that in 1 Thessalonians, but nevertheless. All right, 1 Thessalonians 4:16 through 17. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. First, let's ask, when you read that passage, do you see anything secret about that? Let's see. A cry of command, voice of an archangel, and the sound of the trumpet of God. Does that sound secret? That's why, for the first 1,800 years of the church, no one believed in a secret rapture. I'm just telling you. No one knew anything of this. There's going to be a rapture. No one's going to know what's coming. You're going to zip out of your car and your airplane. Of course, they wouldn't know what that was 1,800 years ago, but anyhow. But when they read the text, the primary text on the rapture, by the way, rapture just means to be seized or to be taken. They didn't see any of that in there. Look at the second part of this passage either. Notice what it says here. It says, so we will always be what? So just imagine what happens here. This text means that however Jesus comes, from that point on, whatever that looks like, we're with Jesus forever. But that's not what dispensationalism teaches. It says you go to heaven, and then you come back to the earth. Some argue halfway through the millennium. Some say you're not at the millennium at all. Some say you're hovering over the millennium. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not a dispensationalist, at least anymore, so I don't know exactly how they would say that. But then that's not the end. In the dispensational teaching, even for pre-millennialists, after 1,000 years, what else do you have to have after 1,000 years? What's after 1,000 years? If you're a Christian, where do you go? Yeah, that's right, the new heavens and the new earth. And so it seems like even the text itself that we're going to have whatever Jesus comes back at that moment, that's going to be the moment of eternity. We will forever be with him. Now, this obviously doesn't mean we're going to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord in the air. That's not what that means. That means when he, sorry, I just thought that was weird. When I read that, I was like, surely no one takes it that literally. You know, your little legs dangling there. I was like, what's that guy doing up there? I don't know. I used to walk into that celestial heavens. It's whatever. Okay, so it's at this point we're also glorified. Let me give you a cross-reference. You don't have to turn this, you don't have to look at this yourself. 1 Corinthians 15, which is another text about when Jesus returns. 51 through 53 says this. It says, behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we should all be changed in a moment. In the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. Which trumpet? The last trumpet. At the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound. It's going to sounds like this. There's going to be a trumpet. Wait, there's a trumpet here too. There's going to be a trumpet. The trumpet will sound and the dead will be raised imperishable and we shall be changed. For the perishable, here's one of my favorite lines. We preach this thing at Easter, this dog will hunt. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body will put on immortality. Why? Now that tells you when Jesus returns, that moment, that's the last trumpet. We see a trumpet here as well. At that moment, this looks like this is talking about the same thing. We who are dead are raised with a new glorified body and changed in the twinkling of an eye, and that body is what? It's immortal and imperishable. Why? Because whatever eternity we're going into is immortal and imperishable. What's the immortal and imperishable eternity? The new heavens and the new earth. I'm telling y'all, this is why dispensationalism is the new kid on the block, because they didn't connect like we're not going to come back to earth. They all hold that view. Glorification now in this view doesn't seem to happen until the new heavens and the new earth. I'm sorry. I don't want to get too complicated here. Let me just do this. Let me take you to something else in Thessalonians, what it says here. It says here that we're going to meet him. Y'all see that where I've highlighted that? We're going to meet him. The Greek word for meet him is apantesis. My Greek's not that good. I can't pronounce that well. Apantesis. It was a term used in the New Testament times to describe when a ruler would come back. So if a ruler left the city walls and he went out to go conquer an enemy and he came back, the people would leave the city and they would go out to meet him outside of the city. They would meet him, celebrate him, and come back into the city with him. Now, that's not a weird image because we already see that with Jesus. When do we see that with Jesus? How many of you remember the triumphal entry? How many of you remember Palm Sunday? What do they see outside of the gates of Jerusalem? They see their king coming. And so they go outside and they meet their king before he comes back. It's the same word that we see here in this passage. So what looks like in the ancient context is what's happening here. Who's returning home? The king who has conquered. And we meet him in the air, right? In the air, and then we return with him in that moment back to the earth where he reigns. Now, if you're a premillennialist, the 1,000-year starts. If you're an amillennialist, nope, we've been in it. We're going in the new heavens and the new earth. And if you're a post-millennialist, you're partying because it's still a party, right? None of those views have a secret rapture. They have a cry, an archangel, and a trumpet, and everyone sees it. Just as the Lord left, so he comes back, and we all see him that way. And so because of that, this is why New Testament scholar N.T. Wright says it this way. Paul's image of the people meeting the Lord in the air, quote unquote, should be read with the assumption that the people will immediately turn around and lead the Lord back to the newly remade world. You know why? Because that's how they did that in the ancient world. Paul's mixed metaphors of trumpets blowing, we've seen that, and living beings being snatched into heaven to meet the Lord are not to be understood as literal truth, as the Left Behind series suggests, but as a vivid and biblically elusive description of the great transformation of the present world in which he speaks elsewhere. Now, obviously I've shown my hand, that's what I believe as well, but I want you to take a look at another important passage that correlates with this. Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, Jesus says, or it says about this, immediately after the tribulation, Jesus says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light and the stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. I don't know why I said it like that, but it sounded cool. Son of Man, I don't know, I was getting my rock star on, it looked pretty awesome. The Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, for they will see the Son of Man coming on the cloud. Have y'all been following us today, by the way, in our Revelation series? That sound a whole lot like the seventh bowl coming? Wreck and shop. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud, what is it? How many trumpets are we going to see? It's all the same trumpet. With a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Now, here's what I want you to see. Now, let me be fair, because I had to talk with a dispensationalist yesterday. I had to be correct on this. I had a call, made a call. I was like, listen, how do you guys interpret this? Because I've forgotten how I was taught. This is what I was raised in. And so what they say, this is actually, this is just Jesus coming to start the millennial kingdom. This is only for Jews. And because the church, what they say is the church, I won't even call out who it was, a very famous writer, not on the list I gave you, said that this is just for, the church is nowhere in this passage. I beg to differ. Look what it says here. It says, the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Does that sound secret to y'all? With the loud trumpet call. It's not even, they put the amps out and they just let this one rip. And they're gather his elect. Now, what I've heard from dispensationalists is that the elect are the Jews, but that's not what that says. 1 Peter calls all of the Christians elect. Matter of fact, it says it all throughout the New Testament. But notice what we see here. We see, just like we see in 1 Thessalonians, we see the descent of the Lord, we see a loud trumpet call, and we see the gathering of God's people. Sounds like 1 Thessalonians isn't talking about like going into the millennium. It just talks about Jesus coming back. And that's the point. I tell you all this to say, this is why the three other views have never held a secret rapture for 2,000 years, and secret rapture theory has been around for 180. You can believe whatever you want, but I'm tired of this going around and no one knows the history behind it. Hey, don't take what I've said for it. Go look it up yourself. Go ask dispensationalists where it comes from, and they'll tell you where it comes from, just like I've told you, except they'll really emphasize that it's the right way. And I'm telling you, you got to pick, and I'm okay what you pick with, but we're not going to not tell the truth about how this happened. So that gets us to the biggest question is, what does Clear Creek believe about the rapture? I don't have a word for pan-rapture. I don't know what I'd be lying. So here's what I'd say. I don't know why there's a blank slide here, because that says, what is our official view? I guess we don't have one. Because we don't have one. That's what it is. We don't have one. So I want you to hear this. We have an open-handed policy. We're open-handed. When I say open-handed, you ought to understand. When I teach systematic theology, I'll talk about open-handed and closed-handed doctrines. A closed-handed doctrine is what we're going to fight you about. We're not going to let it go. The atonement. Jesus is the only way, right? But open-handed issues, those are things that we may have convictions about, but we're not going to make it the law around here. And so the rapture is one of those things. So I'd be lying if I told you the teaching team doesn't have a certain view. You obviously hear in the way that I'm talking that I don't subscribe to the secret rapture view anymore. I don't. But if you do, I'm totally down. Here's what you need to understand. At Clear Creek, you can be, I don't know how they put them all together. You can be a dispensational, mid-trib, drugs, whatever you be whatever you want to be, and we're going to love you. Because in the end, I will tell you this, if Jesus snatches me secretly, I'm not going to argue about it. And I bet you wouldn't either. You just don't want to be left behind, right? That's the whole point. So, but I wanted to do that. So here's what we got. I think I've done this for an hour. We have the millennium. We've covered the rapture. Let me give you some resources that I think can be helpful for you guys. And we're going to take a break. And we're going to have some time for Q&A. So just there was a whole hour. It only took an hour. See how painful that was? It's like a PCR test. You don't just then you're done. So here are the resources. Bible in the Future, Anthony Hoekema. I get asked all the time, Nancy, is there a book that I can read to help me understand all this stuff? There's no better book I've ever read than Anthony Hoekema's The Bible in the Future. I led a class on this past summer, and it filled up within an hour of Clear Creekers, and we just capped it at like 30-something, because 30 was too many people anyhow. And there's no better book I've ever read on it, because I think he does a great job. It changed my viewpoint, just so you know. And I was a dispensationalist going in. So I'll show you my cards. I'll be honest about it, but it's an incredibly magnificent book. Gets quoted by guys that aren't even of his same tribe that still respect it. So got a Calvin Theological Seminary. This book, Gospel and Revelation, you can't buy it unless you buy the trilogy, but it's like $9. By Graham's Goldsworthy. By the way, this comes with the book Gospel and Kingdom, Gospel and Wisdom, and Gospel and Revelation. Gospel and Kingdom is why I bought the book. One of the best books on how you know biblical theology all through the Bible. It's magnificent. And then they just threw in Gospel and Revelation for the heck of it. I read it and was blown away by it. It's not very long, and it helps you understand Revelation in a very simple way. There you go. That's free. David Campbell's Mystery Explained. Like when we don't know how to teach something, we'll just open this up and copy it word for word and say that we made it up. No, let me tell you how this works. So the best commentary that I know about Revelation is Revelation. This is the shorter commentary. It's only 1,000 pages long, by a guy named Greg K. Beale. So you guys need to understand, I searched, whenever we study a certain book of the Bible, I do a search on like who are the top scholars in the world on said book. And then I did a deep dive on Revelation because I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna do this for fun, for my own personal development. I wanna study Revelation on my own. I don't really know it as well as I think I do. So I'm gonna print out every page of Revelation and get a top scholar's commentary. Dr. Beale was number one across the board. Liberals said he was number one. Conservatives said he was number one. Pastors said he was number one. Scholars said he was number one. And so I was like, oh my gosh, let me sit at the foot of this guy, at least by the book. The book I read was not much long. This is the shorter commentary. The longer one was like 1,400 pages. It was still long. But I was blessed immensely by it. And you're getting the fruit of that in our series. I got a chance to talk to him. I did a Zoom chat with him. I was like, man, this is awesome. I get to talk to the number one scholar in the world right now on Revelation. So if you want to do a deep dive on this, get this book. But if you don't want to go that deep, there's a guy that he worked with in this one called David Campbell, who kind of wrote the study notes with it. He just kind of said, you know what? I'm going to put all those study notes and put them right here in a book that's about this big. And that's David Campbell's Mystery Explained. It's the Cliff Note version for people that want to do the Cliff Notes. And it's fantastic. I think he's plagiarizing most of this, but he probably got permission. So with that being said, here's what I want to do. That feels like, I know what it feels like. It feels like I just got a fire hose and sprayed you all down with all this information. But I want to just make you aware of this. The church is broad. There's a kaleidoscope of beliefs, all within orthodoxy, and includes all four of these views. Dispensational premillennialism is a legitimate view. I want you to hear that out of my mouth. It's a legitimate view, and so is post-millennialism, and so is premillennialism, and so which one? Amillennialism, right? They're all legitimate, right? But they all influence how you understand the Bible, how do you understand church in Israel, and how do you understand the rapture. By the way, they all have a rapture in it. They're all immediate except for dispensationalism, which is bifurcated into heaven. That's the difference.
All right, so we are going to jump into some of these questions here. She says all of them. We are not going to get to all of them, but we'll do our best to do what we can here. So. Yeah. Question number one, there is a couple different versions of this question on here, and it has more to do with the series, the Revelation series, and less to do with
everything I said I wasn't going to talk about and ask questions about?
It's more like how we approach Revelation.
All right, let's do it.
So how do you determine what to take literally in Revelation? It seems like we've been chalking a lot up to symbols.
Well, I mean, for us, again, I think it all comes back to the genre of literature. It's apocalyptic in its genre, which means it deals in images and it deals in symbols. And rarely, you can look at the language in the same kind of material at that same era. So John writes, I think Revelation around 95 AD. That wasn't the first apocalyptic work that had been out. There were a ton of apocalyptic works that had been out. And that was kind of the style of the age. That was what was popular. And John takes a popular way to write and employs it. Now that genre just uses image. Everything is symbolic in it. That's just the nature of the writing itself for the genre. And so what you see in the Old Testament as literal gets spiritualized in the New, but Jesus already said stuff like that. He would say, like, you've heard it said, but I say unto you, Like, it literally says you shouldn't commit adultery. But I tell you, if you look at someone with lust in your eye, you've already committed. I mean, he raises everything up. Hebrews talks about, here's an example. I'm convinced that when the Bible talks about that, I don't remember what the passage is, where it says that, I want to say 1 Corinthians, but I'm not sure. I put some notes down here, but it's always helpful when I just scribble stuff on my page and nothing happens. 2 Corinthians 1:20 says, for all the promises of God find their yes in Jesus. Well, which promises are those? It says all the promises. So imagine, how many promises did God give the early fathers of Israel? Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David. Right? He gave them all these covenants, all these promises, and yet the New Testament looks back on the Old Testament and says they're all fulfilled in Jesus. And that's not even literally. I mean, Jesus literally isn't a piece of land. He's not, shockingly, not literally a lamb either. He is spiritually those things. And that's what we actually see in Revelation. Jesus is a lamb, but we know he's not a bleating lamb like a little lamb. We know that he's not either a door, he's not any of those things. But in Revelation, it's all been spiritualized. But even in the New Testament, we see that. I mean, think about when it says, because I understand the argument, hey, if it was a literal promise, it's got to be fulfilled literally in the New Testament. But no, it doesn't. Sometimes if you look at the Old Testament, it wasn't even fulfilled literally. When it says he'd give them all the land, and then when they got there, it says, you now have all the land. But funny how they didn't run out all the enemies. Like there's patches of land they still didn't own. And God said, it's been fulfilled. But they didn't have every square inch of it. So even in the Old Testament, some things weren't fulfilled literally. It gets very cherry picking when this is literal and this wasn't, and every promise God ever fulfilled was literal. Not really, unless you're gonna say literally it's in Jesus. In Hebrews, what does it say? It says that Abraham then pursued the heavenly city. What? I thought he was wanting a piece of land. That's what God told him in Genesis. But it says that they were looking for something beyond that. You know why? Because those things were types. It's a theological term. They were copies, they were patterns, they were echoes of the real substance in Jesus. And so that's why when we get to Revelation, it all funnels in on Jesus. All those things unfold. Notice he's the lamb, he's the temple, he's the great high priest, he's the sacrifice of the high priest. He's actually the temple where the priest sacrifices the lamb. He's all of it. And so this was even mind-blowing to the Jews themselves in Jesus' day when Jesus was like, I am the temple. Tear this bad boy down in 3 days. He did say bad boy. He says, tear this guy down in 3 days, I'll rise it from, and they didn't know what he's talking about because they're literal. And Jesus was talking about something much different. Now you could say, well, it was literally a resurrection, and I give you that. But there's all of that within the New Testament itself that has it spiritualized. I mean, in fact, what Goldsworthy would say, and I think this is right, what God was doing is, what was the piece of land that Israel wanted and knew? Canaan. That's Israel's what they wanted. But for them, it was a copy of something greater, which is what? What is... can't remember, it's not Zechariah. I don't know which text it is right now. It says that there'll come a day where all the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the earth. That's the end game. We're not wrestling for a piece of land in the Middle East. Jesus is coming for all of it. That's what he's coming for, all of it. And it ain't just the earth. It's a whole new cosmos. So everything gets ratcheted up, but the language that John uses is inherently symbolic. He even says it's symbolic. Now, we saw today, things like frogs came out of their mouths. Well, I hope you don't think frogs came out of the mouths, because then he later says, and these are the demonic hordes. Oh, now I got to change that. It's not the frogs. So, but if you want to take that it's all literal, by all means, go ahead and do it. That is an interpretive way to do. That is a way to do it interpretively. But even the most literal people in Revelation don't take it all literally. That's why you have helicopters as locusts and not locusts that are going around stinging people and killing them. I haven't found one person on any spectrum that believes that. But if you believe that there's going to be demon locusts coming around stinging people, you're more than welcome to believe that. I'm sincere in that. I really. There's just reason why. What have we done throughout this whole series? We've showed you how John is taking concepts and ideas from the Old Testament and bringing them over in the New to show you how they're being fulfilled in Jesus and in the world we live in right now and the world to come. So that's why.
All right, so this is a little bit of follow-up on that. I know you said you didn't want to talk about something that we preached on, but that you did preach on this last week, and it goes along with what you were saying. So if the mark of the beast isn't literal, what's the Bible referring to with not being able to buy or sell without having the mark?
Yeah, so when I say the mark of the beast isn't literal, I mean it's not literally on your forehead, it's not literally on your hand.
Thank you for the
that's all I meant. Next question.
Yes. What about the binding?
No, wait. I mean, let's just go back to that. It's not literally on your forehead. It's not literally on your hand. I mean, are you gonna stand in line for 666 day and go, yeah, put that on my hand? I mean, even the most crazy against God people would never do that. Would be naive to think that. They're like that Satan's going, they'll never get it. They'll never guess what's gonna happen. I'm gonna have them stand in line. We're gonna have them stamp 666 here and here. By the way, you know what it also says? If you keep reading Revelation, it says that you also have a mark on your head. It's the name of the Father and the Lamb. I don't see a mark on your head, but the Bible says that that's how we're denoted as followers of God. Now, listen, if at the end of the age, God's got a huge holy stamp book, I'll be the first in line. But you have to understand, this book was written in the first century. John is looking at things in his life that he sees people doing. And so in his lifetime at Ephesus, you had to bow before the altar of the Caesar and say that he's Savior and Lord. You had to commit idolatry. And you got a certificate, all right? You got a certificate that said that you'd done that allowed you to buy and sell. It wasn't on your forehead, or it wasn't on your hand, it wasn't on your forehead, but it represents the mark of the beast. It means you're owned, you're the beast follower, because you've sold out Jesus. That's what it meant. That's what John saw, and he put that into Revelation, which was always the effect of the age. It wasn't just with Rome, it's been in every part of the age, and it'll be to the end of the age. I think it cheapens it when we say, well, it's only at the end of the age, it's gonna be a literal mark. Again, you can believe that if you want to. If you just look at the historical context of when John wrote Revelation, it seems like he already was seeing that in his own lifetime. That's why he warns the 7 churches of Asia Minor. Why would he tell them all this stuff if they're never gonna be there? That's what I would say. But again, there's different views there. They're all wrong. Mine's the right one. No, I'm
all right, so speaking of the different views.
Lord, you know I'm joking.
Yeah. Speaking of different views, how can I discuss different views with someone who believes that there's only one right position?
You can't. You can't. It's like talking to this water bottle. It's like, hey man, I know there's a different way to do this. And the water bottle's like, no, there's not. It's just this way. That's what it feels like. When you talk to someone, it's interesting that there are certain people that hold certain, I'll try to say this kindly, which probably won't come out kindly. There's usually just a handful of groups that are so dogmatic. It's the people that are dogmatic about this that kills me and to kill you. That'll give you all their books and all. Here's what's funny. I've studied more than I feel like most people I know about Revelation and the end times. I mean, I'm not trying to be boastful. I'm just saying I've probably done more work, I'd say, than most people do, most pastors do. And I'm more humble about this. Like, I'm not too sure I know everything on this. I know I don't know everything. And what I do know, I feel like I have confidence in, but man, if I heard a different view and it made better sense of the Bible, I'd change it in a heartbeat. That's how hard Revelation is. And so when someone comes to me and is like, I got it all figured out. Here are the charts. I'm always leery of those folk because they're so dogmatic, you can't even talk to them about another way. Because here's what happens. If you're a dispensationalist, premillennialist. If you're a premillennialist or historic premillennialist, you're an amillennialist or post, we can have a conversation. I'm like, listen, we can argue and debate about it, but I could be wrong. But then you'll talk to some people, it's like, they believe it's the only way. Stay away from those folks because they're incredibly immature spiritually. And they don't know their history. They don't know church history. There have been a lot of God, like the first guy that said, I don't even believe in millennialism. I don't believe in a literal 1,000 years. It wasn't a dude last year. It was St. Augustine. St. Augustine. And you're like, who's St. Augustine? One of the greatest church fathers we ever had. He wrote Confessions. He wrote The City of God. It's The City of God where he's like, listen, man, this whole literal 1,000 years is crazy talk. That was a church father that said that. Not some guy 130 years ago. We're talking a guy about 1,800 years ago. So when you know that, it gives you a little less hubris and a lot more humility to go, you know what, I could be wrong on this. So I think it's hard to talk with people about it if they're already come from the position of, I've already got it all figured out. Because if anything, even us, when we're going, you told me not to ask you a question, so I'm not going to. Yeah, I know. Well, here's my question.
Yeah.
If anything, have you noticed when we even work through Revelation here, we'll say, well, it likely means this. And scholars say this. And it looks like it's doing it because we're not gonna try to say with so much certitude, like this is exactly what it is, because it may not be that. But we've got enough pieces put together, we can make a really good, I don't wanna say educated guess, but we can try our darndest with it. And all of a sudden, at least my perspective is, I feel like I know Revelation more than I've ever known it. And it's incredibly simple, the message. It's complex in how it's layered, but the message is pretty simple. Follow Jesus, stay faithful, don't become an idolater. Jesus is coming back to judge the living and the dead. Stay true to Jesus till the end, and he'll keep you true. That's it. You don't even have to come to the rest of these series. That's the whole story right there.
Yeah, that's good. Question about cremation and the glorified body. So when you think about, being raised, glorified body, are there any issues with being cremated?
Yeah, he won't be able to find you. I don't know. Are you gonna get cremated? Let's just say you are. He's not gonna be able to find you. Yancey's gonna find me. I'm gonna be like at my ranch, boots up, like ready to go. I mean, I was ready, Lord Ryan. I told him not to. So here's what you need to understand. I think Genesis 1 is poetic imagery where it says that God made us out of the dust, because there's theological significance to that. Not because we're literally made out of dust, because we're made from the creation. We should know that we're part of the creation, that we're never gonna be the creator. And yet, even with that being said, if God can quote unquote make us from the dust, he can sure gather us from the dust once we've gone to it. So a cremation, I don't wanna go too long on this because this is what I talk about with my systematic group. Excuse me, y'all. But the Bible is not against cremation in and of itself, but it's against having a poor view of the body. So Christians believe that matter matters, that God is going to raise our bodies from the grave, whatever they look like. By the way, it also says in Revelation that the sea gave up their dead. What do you think those bodies look like that have been there for 2,000 years? There's nothing there. So God will somehow, miraculously, obviously, reconstitute our bodies. But I think cremation is a viable option for Christians, just as long as that you present at your funeral that the body means something. Like we're not putting this body under cremation because we don't care about the body. That's the stuff I hate. By the way, there are theological views that I just shared with you that have a very poor view of the body. They have a very poor view of the earth. They think it's all just going to burn up in the end, instead of being renewed heavens and earth. So the body is important. And if you're going to get cremated, God bless you. My parents are donating their bodies to science. That's how they feel like they can serve a higher purpose. And I think that's pretty noble. They asked for my permission. I thought, well, it's not my, you do whatever you want to do, but like, oh, you're the theologian, make sure that, I'm like, well, I don't know, man, it depends. If you've got some 22-year-old kid working on you, I don't know if you're gonna make it, Dad, but I just said at your funeral, we're gonna talk about why we're doing this and that the body's important. And here's why we've chosen to cremate, blah, 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 blah. Cremation's been around. Christians in India do it. They did it somewhat early in the early church. It wasn't the dominant view, to be honest with you, because people knew that Jesus was gonna raise them. Y'all remember the catacombs? They stuffed those bones in there because they wanted to make sure they had them all in one place. I think God's okay finding you wherever your body is, because your soul's gonna be with him anyhow. So you can be like, Lord, I want that body. The one with the muscles, that's me. That's how I died. So, but yes, cremation, just well thought through and presented, is, I think, legitimate. Others may disagree. But as far as can God reconstitute my body, absolutely, absolutely.
Where do we go when we die? Do the different interpretations
I don't know.
Answer this differently?
No, say that again.
Do the different interpretations, understanding of the millennium, answer that question differently?
Not generally, they don't. Not generally, they don't. What you guys may not understand is when like the wicked die, they don't go to hell immediately. Hell's only mentioned in the last book. Hell's only mentioned in Revelation, where it says that the devil and the beast, they're thrown into the lake of fire with their followers. That's where hell, that's Gehenna. And I don't want to get too tripped up, and if you were in systematic, we could help you out here, but I'll just trouble you. The Bible says that when you die, you go to the place of the dead. Sometimes that's known as Sheol. I think the Greeks called it Hades. That's why Jesus says in Revelation, I have the keys of death and Hades, because John's communicating to the people in his era. You go to the place of the dead. There's a place of the dead where the wicked go and a place of the dead where the righteous go. What we understand from the New Testament, that place seems to be heaven for the righteous, and for the dead, it just says the place of the dead where there's torment. And then it says that death and Hades give up their dead at the end of the age. And they go to a greater torment, this time bodily. Because there's a resurrection of the unrighteous as well. Y'all remember that? There's a resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous. So followers of Jesus get glorified bodies to enter into the new heavens and the new earth. And you can debate whether that's, you have a glorified body or not in whatever you believe about the millennium. If you believe it's a literal 1,000 years, then you might have it there. But the unrighteous also get resurrected. Both parties go to their eternities in a body to have the full experience of either blessing with God in fellowship or to have as God's wrath. Those are the two realities. And so I've even forgot the question. Oh yeah, do those different views have different ways to interpret where you go when you die? Not really. Dispensationalists have a little bit of a tweak on some of that stuff, but they're all pretty much the same.
So looking at the amillennial view, how do we understand Satan as being bound?
Mm-hmm. So Satan is bound. In the amillennial view, he's bound because it's during the gospel age of what we're in now. They would argue that he's bound from deceiving the nations from hearing the gospel, which is true. Jesus says in the Great Commission to go into all the world and share the gospel. Acts 1:8 says you'll receive power and you'll be my witnesses, and that's exactly what happened. How many nations came to Jesus or came to a gospel sense in the Old Testament? Only one did, Israel. And maybe you could split it in half and say Israel, Judah, but no one else came. No one else came. No other nation came. Look at all the nations around. None of them came. In fact, they hated Israel. And yet Jesus came, and all of a sudden, after Jesus left, the church started to explode. And it went to Jerusalem, and then Judea, Samaria, Judea, and now to the ends of the earth. And what an amillennialist would say is, I'll tell you how that happened. Jesus bound Satan. Now, to bind him doesn't mean that he has no power. It means he's limited in his capacity to hurt the church. And there's some truth to that. Jesus says in Matthew 12, even in his own ministry, what are you doing here with the kingdom? He says, you can't, they asked, how do you cast out demons? He said, you can't come into the strong man's house unless you bind him first. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 12. So he said, referencing the devil, he's bound him. I'll give you a verse here, John 12, 31 through 32. Now is the judgment of this world, Jesus says. Now will the ruler of this world be cast out. By the way, that cast out's the same cast out we see in Revelation. And when I am lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all people to myself. All peoples will come when I'm lifted up. So we even see Jesus saying, I've cast out the devil. And actually the word cast out is the same word for being cast into the abyss in Revelation 20. Same word. That the devil's limited in his power to deceive the nations, and that's why gospel evangelism can work. By the way, it's why post-millennialists, they really get on top of that. They're like, that's why it's going to be a party, and then you can't stop the church, so much so that the church can be that successful. I'd like to believe that. I tend to have, it's a fight between two kingdoms. But that's what the amillennialists would say. By the way, it's what Augustine said as well. He said when Jesus came, he bound Satan and threw him in the abyss for 1,000 years. And then he said it wasn't a literal 1,000, and he got all the people mad at him. Then he's like, but I'm Augustine, you do what I say. So he didn't say that. Maybe.
When the new heavens and the new earth are formed, what will happen to the old heaven?
Yeah, well, I don't know, because the Bible doesn't say much about it. Not much. Not much. I'd say maybe quite a bit. If heaven is the realm where God specifically blesses with his presence that's unique. And Revelation 21 says that heaven and earth meet once again. So this is a throwback to Genesis 1. So we have paradise, paradise lost, and paradise found. Thanks, John. Was that Milton that wrote that? Sorry, John. But what you have in Revelation is you have actually a better creation, a fuller redemption than what you have in Genesis 1. It's even better. It's not Adam and Eve with God. It's the whole people of God with God, the people of God with God. And it says that heaven and earth meet. It says, I saw a new Jerusalem coming down out of the heavens. And actually the way that Jerusalem is described is actually the people of God, which is crazy because you know how we've talked about it. It seems like there's this heavenly copy to everything that we see on the earth. Like if there's the church here, they have the 7 stars that represent the angels, represents the church. You have all animate creation. You have these 4 living creatures that represent the creation. It's just crazy copies, if you will. And it seems like there's the same thing for the church, but it says at the end of the age, they all come together. and there's no sickness, nor death, nor hell. That's where I'm shooting for. That's why we're so bullish at Clear Creek about talking little about heaven and a lot about the new heavens and the new earth. You know how much the Bible talks about, so when you die, between when you die and Jesus returns, the theologians call that the intermediate state. It's kind of like, it feels like a halfway house in the sense that you're with Jesus in heaven, but you're not bodily, you don't have your body yet, right? Our souls are with him. And the Bible doesn't say much about it. You know why? Because it doesn't care. Paul doesn't care about it because it's not the end game. The end game is, come quickly, Lord Jesus. Come quickly, Lord Jesus. Why? Because Jesus comes for the fullness of his kingdom in the new heavens and the new earth. Now, all of those views that I shared with you, dispensational premillennialism, amillennialism, post-millennialism, they all have the same view. Jesus, at some point, starts the new heavens and the new earth. That's the game. That's what Paul and these guys talk about all the time. Where do I go when I die and what's it like? Talks this much. In fact, Paul got caught up with what's called the third heaven. Remember, I don't remember if it's Ephesians, Galatians.
I told you not to ask me a question.
Book in the New Testament. It's just a book in the New Testament. Remember when Paul has this vision and he says, now in the ancient world, they thought heaven was, they talked about heaven in three ways. The atmosphere is the first level. Space or the stars is the second level. By the way, they thought the earth was a dome. That's what they did back in the day. I'm looking at you like you're gonna tell me that they were, but they did. You remember it's called the firmament? The firmament. They thought it was fixed there because they didn't have rocket ships. They didn't have NASA. So, and then beyond that, they had celestial waters, and then there was God up in his heaven. That was called the third heaven. So what does Paul say? He has a vision. He says, I had a vision. I was caught up to the third heaven. What happened to the first two? They didn't say that. They knew exactly where he was at. He was with God in the fullness of his kingdom. And Paul returns, he says, and I was permitted not to tell you anything. I can't tell you what it was like because you'd want to go right away. So when you see these people that have these books that say they went to heaven and can tell you about heaven, it's weird they got permission, but the Apostle Paul didn't. Paul says he wasn't permitted to do it. You know why? Because he didn't have the authority to do that. Only Jesus has that authority. And he locked that thing up. Now all he's doing is breaking seals. So I just want to get on around. I need to stop. So next question.
All right. This one's probably my favorite.
Oh, no.
This is a good one. I don't know who did it. It's anonymous, but here we go.
It's anonymous. Those are my favorite ones.
Well, a lot of these are, just because it's hassle to put in your name. Why does this matter?
It's a hassle to put in your name?
Yeah, you have to type in things like that. Yeah, so the question is, why does this matter? As in, if we are open-handed on this issue, why spend so much time, energy, effort, resources on this topic for weeks?
I would say this. I would say, that guy's the life of the party right there, isn't he?
Hey, man, it got votes. It got votes.
I know, I'm sure. Invite those guys to the Christmas shindig. Here's what I'd say. Let's see, how long have we been to church, Ryan? Founded in 1993.
28 and a half years.
28 and a half years, we've only done Revelation once. There's your answer. We've done Revelation once in 28 years. So we spent all this time not talking about it because pastors are scared to preach it. They're scared because of y'all. Because you got some views that somehow someone imbued in you because you got your teachers from your radio and your TV and whatever, but you've never done the hard work on it. And they do the hard work and they get up here and they just get railed on because they've actually done the work. And then when they do it, it so overwhelms them. I mean, I've wept more studying Revelation than anything else. I mean, you and I have talked about it. Get weepy to think about what Jesus is doing. And I wish I'd have done it sooner. I remember, I've told these guys recently, listen, man, I was not going to die and not preach this book, period. Because it's been a gift to Clear Creek. I don't know of another series we've done lately that's been this dynamic. Can I get a witness? I mean, listen. What we're saying is, I think what I said was the millennium is not that important in the grand scheme of Revelation since it's got one passage. But we have all these internecine fights in the church about it because someone thinks they know something about it. But then when you actually look and talk about it, you can have some real constructive conversations. And I'm telling you, they're legitimate Christians on all four views, and they're godly people, and you would love them, right? And we're composed of that here, although I don't know of any post-millennialists. I want you, because you would never ask that question. You'd be like, when's the party? Because it's only going to get better, right? And so what I would say is these are things that, well, listen, we said we're going to out of form. Look how big it is. People want to know. The problem is people don't want to talk about this. And we just said, we're not going to do that. We're here to shepherd people, and we're going to tell you stuff. I joked about, like, I'm going to say stuff just makes people mad. But listen, I'm more committed to following Jesus and serving you and telling you what I think is the truth and doing the hard work for that. I got to be held accountable to God for what I say. And so does Ryan, so does Bruce, and everybody else. And so we thought, you know what? We're going to be held accountable for what we don't say. Let's go get into Revelation. Let's go get it. And so we did. Give me something else fires me up.
All right, yeah, man. We still got, we're doing
14
pretty well. Yeah, we're doing well on time.
I don't know what we're doing. Let's sing a song.
Yeah.
No, let's not do that. Let's not do that. Let's not do that. I'm not gifted.
Yeah. All right, so what do you think about the idea that most of the prophecies and visions in Revelation were fulfilled within the first few centuries after the book was written?
That's what a preterist would say. Some of you don't even know what that means. Most of you don't. So preterism is this idea that Jesus fulfilled most everything. All of Revelation's been fulfilled within the first century. It's called preterism. Preter means, in the Greek, I believe it means like full or complete. If it doesn't, I don't know what it means. I thought that's what it meant. So preterism is, the temple was destroyed in AD 70. And when Jesus talks in Matthew 24, about the destruction, he does allude to the temple, and everything that's put in with the temple is also talking about not just the destruction of the temple, he also loops in some things about the return of Jesus. And so a preterist, what's called a full preterist, believes that it all was fulfilled in the destruction of the temple, and Jesus spiritually returned to destroy the temple, and that's it, it's all been fulfilled. Okay, so most people I know don't believe that, even most theologians, they like that idea, but they do think Jesus is coming back, so they tend to believe what's called half-preterism, which basically says there's a lot of revelation that's already been fulfilled, which isn't really a crazy idea. The debate is, when does it stop being fulfilled and when does it start having a fulfillment yet to be? That's the big debate. And so I don't remember what was the exact precise part of that question is. That's the real debate is, like we said from the very beginning, some people read Revelation and everything's future. And I think that robs us from reading it well, because there is a present reality that, I don't even know why John would have written it to the 7 churches if he didn't specifically want to mention them about what they had to do in light of idolatry. But notice that theme's carried all the way through the rest of the book, all the way to the end. And so other people say that it's all taken place. We have an eclectic view. We believe that some of it's taken place, some of it's going on now, and some of it's going on in the future. And we also hold the view that it recapitulates. And I'm more convinced of that more than ever studying it, because we almost have to be creative when we do these. We've done today, so we finished the third set of 3 sevens. And they almost all do the same thing. It's not like God's bored, like, I don't know, do the same thing you did last time, Just make it trumpets this time. And then after the trumpet, you know what, I'm tired, let's do the same things, but this time with the bowls. Those are intentionally repeating themselves because they're seeing the same thing. And we see this all throughout Revelation. And what's crazy is that makes the experience even richer because it gets a little deeper every time. So I don't know how to answer that specifically. It just depends on how you want to read the text. I got friends of mine just right down the road. They think the whole Revelation's futuristic. That's totally cool. We don't hold that position. I said that position. The teaching team does not come from that perspective.
Yep. In the new heavens and the new earth, will we enjoy literal things like animals, pets, and actual food?
It seems that, and I think Bruce is going to get into some of this, so I don't want to steal his thunder here. But it seems like, what the heavens, not heaven. And again, we can debate whether this is the millennium or not. It seems like the new heavens and the new earth are pictured as a great banquet, the marriage supper of the Lamb, where we can eat and feast. And so if you could eat and feast in Genesis 1, I believe that you'll eat and feast after Revelation 21. It's the same bookends. There's the tree of life in both of them. There are rivers through both of them, waters. It's the same stuff, and it's intentional. Actually, Genesis 1 Eden is really a temple language. It says that you're to tend the garden. They're actually priests tending the priestly garden of the temple. That's what the language is in there. And guess what we have at the end of the age? The temple coming down, we the priests as well. So it's a fuller vision. It's not just Eden redone. It's like blown up with steroids. It's amazing. It covers the whole earth, right? And so what we have here is like everything there is physical. Our eternity is physical. Matter matters. And so I think, yes, we'll eat, and will our pets be there? I don't know, man. I'm hoping they are. Except for some 2 cats I had. I hope hope they're in hell. Hope they're burning in the lake of fire. I told you, what I'm gonna say. And he's like, ah. So that's really not true. I love my cats as well. But can you believe that? What are we talking about? I don't know, but Pastor Yancey said he loved his cats. Put that on Twitter. Here's what I would say. The Bible does not tell us this. But if in the fullness of redemption, and it says that all creation groans, Romans says all creation groans for redemption, I'd like to think that the animal kingdom is a part of that. I don't have any specific text. It will not surprise me that all of these animals will be there, minus mosquitoes. There's no redemptive purpose for them that I know about. Can I get another witness for that? All right. Sorry, Jesus, I don't know what you could do with that one, right? But I like to think that, but I don't know.
Yeah. So how do we reconcile Jesus coming?
Well, stop, let me just say this, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll tell you what's not true. There's not a rainbow bridge your pet walks across. I don't know why y'all post that stuff like it's somewhere out of the Bible. There's only one rainbow. It's over the altar of God in Revelation 5 and 6. It's not the rainbow bridge. I know that's what you mean, but it also feels like when someone dies, like, well, they're an angel now. No, they're not. They're not an angel. The Bible, you don't want to be an angel. They get judged at the end. You want to be a redeemed human. That's what you want to be. Sorry, that was the theologian in me. I can't stand that stuff. I've had an animal die. He didn't get on the rainbow bridge. We put him somewhere else. But I hope to see him in the end. So, sorry, man. Sorry. People will be like, Yancey, my dog was on the bridge, is what they're going to say. I'm telling you, you hate dogs. Nope. Love Jesus.
All right, we're gonna we'll wrap this up soon. We're going off the rails.
You still don't want to do that. I told you. It was late.
We got a couple more here.
I'm getting hangry.
Yeah.
I didn't get to eat this stuff.
Yeah. All right. How do you reconcile Jesus coming like a thief, being seen by those who love him after his resurrection, and also coming on the clouds, presumably seen by everyone?
Yeah, the thief stuff is just the speed in which it happens, the surprisingness of it. It's not like he's coming and he's going to have a ski mask on. Oh my gosh, was that Jesus? Or was someone just trying to steal my car? You know, that's not how that's going to be. Let's not go too literal with what's going on here. Jesus uses analogies and images. I'm coming like a thief in the night. Notice what he says, be ready. That's the point, be ready, because it's going to come when you don't expect it. That's why I get really crazy when people say I can predict when Jesus is coming back. Y'all just stop following those people. How many times they have to be wrong? Well, you know what, Yancey, we're closer to Jesus' return than we've ever been. That's true every day we wake up.
You're getting older every day.
Listen, that's right. I'm going to see Jesus closer tomorrow than I did yesterday. That's true at any point. So the thief talks about the speed. You need to be ready, that he comes on the clouds. Frankly, that's messianic language from Daniel and Ezekiel, I believe. Coming on the clouds, that he reigns, that he's heavenly. It's like no, he's not coming today. There's no clouds in the sky, you know, and it's not cumulus. You can't ride cumulus. It's got to be cirrus. It's got to be cirrus. It's like we're just over interpreting stuff like crazy. That's where if you try to literal everything, no one does that because you'll drive yourself crazy. Jesus is coming back. That's what you need to know. How did he leave? That's how he's returning. That's it.
All right, final question here.
Thank you.
Yeah. How would a belief in any one of these end times, really I would say, how would a belief in all these end times help shape our evangelism?
Oh, well, I mean, it was what we said today. They all have judgment at the end, period. We all know the clock's ticking. We just don't know when it strikes midnight. Because Jesus is coming like a thief in the night, we ought to be ready. But we also need to be spiritually ready. It doesn't mean like you have to have your gym shorts and your sneakers ready, right? That's silly. You just need to be spiritually ready. You need to be loving Jesus and being a part of his kingdom and doing his kingdom work. I look at a lot of these faces, a lot of people I know are deeply embedded in the life of Clear Creek Community Church. Just keep following Jesus, keep serving him, and bring people into the kingdom. Because there is coming a day where Jesus will separate the sheep from the goats. And I think someone had a question here is if you're a dweller of the earth, which is code language for an unbeliever, can you ever get out of that? Is your fate sealed? No, your fate's not sealed, not as I understand it. I mean, Jesus says that we're to share the gospel with the world. So we want to bring people into the kingdom. So to me, we're a little more than halfway through with Revelation. I was going to ask you a question, but I guess I won't. But I know for me, it's increased my desire to want to share the gospel with people because I feel the nearness of Jesus in the text. It's weird. I feel in the symbols and in the imagery, actually a greater presence of Jesus than I've felt in other texts just recently because I've never gotten to get in the room of Revelation. I never got there and tried to actually seek to understand. And then when you finally seek to understand, you're just in awe. Bruce and I were talking the other day. He's like, Yancey, I just want to worship. I just want to worship. And it feels like every time we end, like Jesus is somehow being worshiped at the end. There's this doxological element to Revelation. In other words, there's a praise and worship set almost at the end of every section. And there's a reason for that because he is our king who's coming back to make all things new. And we want to get as many people in there as we can. And not in some way where we're punching tickets. We want to give them a better life. This is the life God created them to have. So I think regardless of your millennial view, everyone's stacking hands on, hey, let's go share the gospel with the Bay Area and Houston and Texas and the US and the world. If anything, Revelation's just hyped me up more to do that because you're seeing the end game. You're reminded that not just judgment's coming, which it is, but that Jesus is coming to throw a party for his people for eternity. That's good stuff. I want my friends that don't know Jesus to get in on that.
Amen. It's a good word.
Yeah.
Hey, well, thank you for all the work you put into tonight.
You're welcome.
Revelation.
Thank you guys.
Yes.
Blessings to you guys.
For being willing to sit in the hot seat.
Yeah.
So, hey, and thank you guys for being here tonight. I invite you to stand. You guys can be dismissed from here, but thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you guys.